In 1965, a black family knew by Saturday night exactly how Sunday was going to go. Today, most of us don't have a Sunday at all. And number one on this list is not a tradition. It's the thing that made the other 24 possible. We went into the Smithsonian's archives and more than a dozen historical sources to rebuild one whole Sunday, morning to night. Number 2 fed an entire block without a government check. Number 25 is sitting in a museum right now, behind glass. And number 12 was so ordinary, nobody thought to write it down, which is why it almost got lost. You think all this ended because we stopped caring, but we never stopped caring. Something else changed, and it didn't ask permission. Now, some of you are already saying, I still do that. Good. You're one of the few who never let go. Number 25, the hot comb on the stove. Sunday started on Saturday, when your mother turned on the burner and set that comb right over the blue flame. First came the wash, head bent over the kitchen sink. Shampoo, if there was any. And if there wasn't, folks say dish soap did the job just fine. Then she sat you down with your head between her knees and said one word. Still, she never brought that comb straight down. She wiped the teeth on a kitchen towel first, blew on it, and started at the kitchen, the back of the neck. Always from the back. They say it took an hour, sometimes 2. The smell of warm grease and pressed hair filled the whole house. And everybody remembers the ear. You held your breath when that comb came close to it. But then came the relaxer. 1 jar, 30 minutes, no more chair, no flame, no hands. So the ritual turned into an appointment. And here's what almost nobody knows. That hot comb sits in the Smithsonian's collection today, in a museum, with a little card next to it explaining what it was. What was Saturday night to us is history to this country now. But while that comb was cooling, somewhere else in the house, something was hanging that nobody was allowed to touch. Number 24. The clothes hanging on the door. They weren't in the closet. They hung on the door frame in plain sight, ironed and starched stiff. And those weren't your good clothes. Those were your Sunday clothes. There was a difference, and everybody understood it without anybody explaining it. But in the 70s, churches started saying something generous. Come as you are. So walking in stopped costing anything, and what cost nothing marks nothing. Those clothes were never for God. He saw you just fine in work pants. They were there to tell a child, today is not an ordinary day, and neither are you. Psychologists today call it marking the transition. Our mothers called it ironing. Set it out on Saturday. One outfit for one day. And under those clothes, on the floor, there was newspaper. Number 23. The shoes on the newspaper. On top of the paper, the shoes. Daddy's, mama's, every child's. In a row. Shining them was somebody's job. In a lot of houses, it was the oldest boy, and nobody asked him twice. Polish, brush, then the rag, until you could see your face. You remember that smell? That smell doesn't leave you. Most families had 1 pair per person. That's exactly why they got shined. A worn shoe said nothing. A dirty shoe said plenty. But then came the plastic shoe. The kind you can't shine, because it won't take a shine. So the brush was gone. And so was the 12-year-old learning to take care of the little he had. It's not about how much you've got. It's about how you keep it. 10 minutes, one Sunday, with a grandchild next to you. But while you were shining shoes, tomorrow's dinner was already moving in the kitchen. Number 22. Sunday dinner started on Saturday. Beans soaking. Collard greens washed 3-4 times until the water ran clean with no grit in it. The cake already baked and covered with a cloth. Because come Sunday, Mama wasn't going to have time. So the whole house worked on a Saturday night for a meal nobody would taste until the next day. And nobody complained. But then came food that was already made. And with it, a new idea. That cooking is wasted time. Those women believed the opposite. That soak was how 12 people ate on what it cost to feed 4. That wasn't patience. That was math. Put something in soak this Saturday, and when it was all done, the hair, the clothes, the shoes, the pot, that house went dark early because the next day started before the sun, and it started with a sound no kitchen makes anymore. Number 21. The radio that woke the house. That was the sound. The radio in the kitchen. Nobody chose it. It was just on. And at that hour on Sunday, it was gospel. Mahalia Jackson. The Soul Stirrers. The Dixie Hummingbirds. In a lot of cities, there was a station that switched its whole lineup over on Sunday morning. Mama was already up with the skillet hot, and that music went out the window and down the street. You woke up inside it. The house was already singing. But then came the headphones, then the phone. So the music stopped belonging to the house and started belonging to each person. And a family of 5 started waking up in 5 different mornings. That's what got lost, not the song. That it played for everybody at once. Turn it up loud one Sunday. And what was in that skillet was no ordinary breakfast. Number 20. The big breakfast before church. Nobody went to church on a bowl of cereal. Eggs, sausage or bacon, grits, biscuits made from scratch, sometimes salmon croquettes, which sounded fancy and came out of a can. All of it in the same cast iron skillet. 20 years in that kitchen, never once washed with soap. That wasn't too much. That was strategy. Service had no end time, and no child of hers was going to sit hungry on a pew for 3 hours. But then came boxed cereal, served cold, eaten standing up. So the first hour of the day stopped gathering anybody. They say now the breakfast table predicts things no test can predict. Our mothers never read that. They just set the table. One sit-down breakfast a week. Just one. But before anybody walked out that door, there was an inspection. Number 19. The Vaseline and the front door check. Nobody left that house ashy. Nobody. That jar of Vaseline passed through every hand. Elbows, knees, face. Then came the inspection. Mama grabbed your chin, turned your face side to side, checked your shoes, pulled your hem down. And if there was something on your face, out came the thumb. You know the thumb. If something was wrong, you didn't leave, even if it made you late. Because what walked out that door wasn't just you. It was the whole house. But then came an idea that sounded modern. It doesn't matter what people think. So the inspection went, and with it, the lesson that showing up right is respect. For yourself first. That woman wasn't teaching you to be accepted. She was teaching you to never be looked down on. Now, what your grandmother put on top of all that is another story. Number 18. The hat. They called them crowns. And that wasn't a nickname. That's exactly what they were. Wide brim, feathers, netting, flowers, matched to the dress, gloves, and purse to match. A lot of them got bought once and lasted 20 years in their box, wrapped in tissue paper. And there was an unwritten rule. You did not sit behind a big hat if you wanted to see anything. She had earned it. But the 80s came, and churches filled up with people dressed like they were going anywhere else. So the Crown lost its stage, and gone was the one morning a week when a woman who cleaned other people's houses walked into a room like a queen. That woman spent 6 days being invisible. On Sunday, she put on her crown and the crowd parted. That hat wasn't vanity. It was the answer. If there's one left in your family, bring it out. You don't throw that away. And with the crown on, that woman stepped outside. But she didn't step out alone. Number 17, the whole block walking the same direction. By 9:30, the whole street was moving, and everybody was headed the same way. Whole families, the elders slow, the kids up front. You greeted everybody by name. And if your neighbor didn't come out, somebody knocked on her door. Because church was 6 blocks away, inside the neighborhood, not outside it. But then came the highway and the move to the suburbs. The old church ended up 40 minutes by car and straight home after. So the church survived, but the walk to church disappeared. And on those 6 blocks is where you learned who was sick, who'd lost a job, who needed a plate brought by. The congregation didn't start at the church door. It started on the sidewalk, parked 3 blocks away, walk the rest. Number 16, Sunday school, before service. For the kids, Sunday started an hour earlier than it did for the grown folks. 9:30, a separate room, and a woman from the congregation up front. Nobody paid her. Plenty of them did it for 30, 40 years, teaching the children of children they'd taught. There were picture cards, verses learned by heart, and a gold star by your name when you showed up. Miss a Sunday, and she asked about you. And once a year, the recitation in front of the whole church, in your good clothes, palms sweating. And that, standing in front of 200 people at 7 years old and speaking, is something a lot of us didn't do again until college, if college came. But Sunday filled up with other things. Youth sports, work shifts, the weekend chopped into pieces. So the early hour fell first, because it was the easiest to cut. And it was never just the verses. It was a 60-year-old woman who knew your name and told you things nobody at home had time to say. Teach a child something. Half an hour, one Sunday. Same half hour every week. And when that hour ended, the big doors opened, and inside, something happened that doesn't happen anywhere anymore. Number 15, the child who didn't move. 2 hours, sometimes 3, and that 6-year-old did not move. No screen, no toy, and nobody had to yell because the warning came before you walked in, out on the sidewalk. Quiet. Don't you embarrass me in there? After that, one look from the far end of the pew, and that child straightened right up. That wasn't fear. That was a child learning there's a place where the world does not revolve around him. But then came a well-meaning idea. Children need entertaining. So came the separate rooms, then the screen in the little hand. And that child stopped learning the one thing that Pew ever taught. Today, they call it self-regulation and write whole books about it. Our grandmothers called it home training, and they taught it free, on a wooden pew. And the child who sat still, somebody paid. Number 14, the candy from the purse. It came from 2 rows back, a hand over your shoulder, not a word. And there it was, a peppermint, hard, striped, in cellophane that crackled way too loud. Butterscotch sometimes, peppermint almost always, and always from the same purse, the one belonging to the elder who'd sat in that same seat for 40 years. She pressed it into your palm and folded your fingers over it. She wasn't your grandmother. She wasn't kin to you at all. but she carried candy for other people's children every Sunday of her life, and she knew exactly which one of you needed it. But those ladies passed on, and the ones who came behind carried wallets, not purses. So the gesture ended, and with it, the first time many of us received something from a grown-up who owed us nothing. Keep candy in your purse. A child will remember that for 40 years. And that same lady, when her turn came, stood up. Number 13, testimony service. Before the sermon, the floor opened and the people spoke. Somebody stood up without being called. I just want to thank the Lord. And they told it. The job that came through right on time. The bill somebody paid without leaving a name. The son who came back home. And while one person spoke, the whole church answered back. Somebody said, Amen. Somebody said, take your time. The room carried you. It was the 1 hour of the week when a man who swept floors could stand up and be heard by 200 people in silence. But services got organized, printed programs, schedules. The 11 o'clock that ends at 12:15 because there's another one behind it. So the first thing cut was the one thing you can't put on a clock, the people's voice. And that was never filler. That was a whole people keeping count, out loud, that they had survived another week. Number 12, the church mothers. This is the one that almost got lost because nobody ever wrote it down. It was too ordinary to explain. There were women in that congregation you called Mother, Mother Wilson, Mother Grace. They weren't your blood. They weren't yours on any piece of paper. But they could correct you. They could sit you down. They could call your house. And if your mother worked the night shift, you ate at that woman's table, and nobody counted it as a favor. They sat in the front pews, often in white, with an authority that came from no title. It came from having raised half the congregation. But then came the moves, the distance, and a phrase that sounds reasonable now. Everybody raises their own. So those women's hands were let go, and a lot of children ended up with 2 adults instead of 20. When a mother worked 12 hours, she knew her child had 6 other women watching him. That wasn't a program. That was people. If one of those ladies is still at your church, go see her. There aren't many left. Number 11, service ended when it ended. Nobody watched the clock, not even the pastor. If the choir was on fire, it kept going. If somebody rose to speak, they got to speak. If the Spirit moved through that room, it could run to 2 in the afternoon. Folks fanned themselves with the program and settled in. Dinner was in the pot, waiting. The pot was in no hurry. But then came Sunday shifts, because the stores started opening and somebody had to work them. So church got a schedule, and the day that was never measured turned into a 75-minute block between 2 other things. It's not that we stopped going, it's that we stopped having time while we were there. And when those doors finally opened, everybody headed to the same place, because what was waiting in that house had been cooking since the night before. Number 10, the dishes that came out one day only. There was a set of china that never got used. It sat in the cabinet, behind glass, since before you were born. It came out on Sundays. The good tablecloth with it, and real glasses, not the jelly jars from during the week. A lot of women bought it piece by piece, 1 cup a month, out of the catalog. Some of it came from trading stamps, licked and pasted into little books for years. Others inherited it. And every one of them knew exactly which piece the set was missing. But then came the paper plate, and an idea that sounded practical. Why dirty dishes? So the washing up ended, and so did the signal. because that china was never for showing off. There were no guests at that table. It was there to tell her own family, "You deserve the good things, not when company comes. Today, bring it out. It's in your house right now, waiting on a day that stopped coming. And with the table set, nobody touched a thing yet." Number 9. Nobody touched a plate before Grace. The food was served and steaming, and those children had their hands in their laps. The eldest said it. Grandfather, father, or grandmother, if she was the head of that house. And it was no 10-second line. It named the sick, the ones far away, and the ones already gone. In that prayer, the family's dead kept showing up every single week. That's how the children knew who they were. But then the television moved into the living room, and the plate started leaving the kitchen to sit in front of it. So the table lost the moment when everybody looked at the same thing at the same time. That grace was the switch. 12 people quitting 12 separate things to do one thing together. Do it again. Even 15 seconds, even if it's just the two of you. And that table never held 2 generations. It held 3. Number 8, 3 generations every week. Grandmother, children, grandchildren, and not at Christmas, on Sunday. Half the time they lived in the same house, or 2 streets over. The grandkids ran in already knowing where they sat. And that's where the family story got told. Who came up from Alabama and what year? What your great-grandmother's real name was? Who lost the land? And how? But the work moved far away. Grandmother in one state, grandkids in another. So that table turned into 2 phone calls a month. Our history wasn't in books. It was in the mouth of an 80-year-old woman on a Sunday between servings. When those Sundays ended, the only place it got told ended too. Ask the oldest person in your family something and record it. This week, and what sat on that table would cost a fortune today. Number 7, one big meal, made in cast iron. There was no supper that night. There was dinner at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and that meal was the whole day. Fried chicken or a roast, collard greens with a ham hock in them, baked macaroni and cheese, candied yams, potato salad that only one person was allowed to make, cornbread in the same iron skillet, and sweet tea in a pitcher, dead center. It was cooked with lard, with bacon grease, with the grease can right by the stove. Nothing got thrown out. But in the 70s, a new message came down from on high. Animal fat was the enemy. So those kitchens traded lard for seed oils nobody in our families had ever laid eyes on. And in the decades after, this community got sicker, not healthier. Today, there are researchers going back over that advice. And one thing isn't argued anymore. That was real food, cooked by somebody who knew what was in it. That was never the problem. Your grandmother didn't need a laboratory to tell her what went in her skillet. She's been right for 60 years, waiting on somebody to publish it. And at that table, there was a seat you could not sit in. Number 6, the kids' table. It was in the kitchen, or a folding table in the corner. Every cousin ate there. The grown folks were in the other room. And when a child drifted too close, somebody said it. Grown folks are talking. That sounds harsh now. But at that table, they talked about the mortgage, who was really sick, who needed help this month, and how much. Children had no business carrying that. And moving up to the grown folks' table never depended on age. It depended on somebody deciding you were ready. Nobody announced it. There was just a plate set for you. But houses got smaller, and families did too. So the kids' table disappeared, and the promotion went with it. Because that's what it was, a promotion. And today, there is no moment left that tells a young person, you are not a child in this family anymore. And when that meal ended, there were leftovers. Plenty. And what got done with them is the reason no house on that block went hungry. Number 5, the drop-in visit. Nobody called first. Calling first didn't exist. You knocked on a Sunday afternoon and you came on in. And the house was ready, because on Sunday, it was always ready. And feeding one more was never a problem. There was always one more plate. But then came the phone in the pocket, and a new rule that sounds like good manners. Call before you come. So visiting turned into a plan, and a plan gets canceled. What got lost is the chance that somebody might just show up. Today, an elder can spend a whole Sunday alone, knowing nobody's going to knock, because nobody knocks. Knock on one, unannounced. Somebody's been waiting a long time for that. Number 4, the porch. After dinner, the grown folks went out to the porch, and they stayed till dark. Nobody did anything. They sat. They fanned. A pitcher of something cold sat on the rail. They watched people go by. They talked about nothing for 3 hours. And from that porch, you could see the whole street. Who passed? Who hadn't come outside in 2 days? Which child was somewhere he had no business being? But then came air conditioning. And it was relief. Those people had earned it. So the family moved inside, and that block lost its eyes. That porch was the neighborhood's security. There wasn't a camera anywhere. There were 4 ladies watching the street, and everybody knew it. Set 2 chairs outside one Sunday afternoon. Watch who comes over. Number 3, everybody home before dark. When the sun started dropping, that house gathered itself. Nobody gave an order. The kids came in. The company said their goodbyes. The kitchen got put away, the leftovers wrapped, and the radio came down low. It wasn't fear of the street. It's that Sunday ended a certain way, same as it began a certain way, and everybody knew the shape of it. But work crept into Sunday night, shifts, and the screen with no off hour. So the day lost its ending, and a thing with no ending gives nobody rest. And those people worked harder than we do, much harder. But they walked into Monday with something almost nobody has now, one night where nothing happened. Number 2, the plate that went out the door. This is the one I promised you at the start. When that meal ended, out came the aluminum foil, and plates got made. One for the lady on the corner who lived alone, one for the house with the sick man in it, one for the woman who just had the baby, one for the pastor, always, and one for the house where something had happened that week, and everybody knew which house that was. The children carried them, on foot, plate warm between 2 hands, under orders not to run. You knocked. You handed it over. You walked back. And you never returned that dish empty. Everybody knew that rule too. And nobody called it charity. The word wouldn't have crossed anybody's mind. Because next week, that plate could come walking the other way. Do the math. 12 houses, 5 families, making 2 plates every Sunday. That's 10 meals moving up and down that street every single week. No office. No paperwork. Because that was the whole point. Nobody had to ask. That plate arrived before asking was ever necessary. But for it to go out, 3 things had to line up at once: food to spare, somebody home to receive it, and a child free to walk 6 doors down. So when Sunday filled up with work, those 3 stopped landing on the same day, and that plate stayed in the kitchen. It still works. 1 plate, 1 door. This Sunday. Number 1. And it's not a tradition. It's a boundary. Sunday was defended. The stores didn't open. Across most of this country, there were laws that said they couldn't. They called them blue laws. You couldn't sell clothes or furniture or a car. Plenty of places, not even food. And that meant one very concrete thing. Your boss could not call you in. There was nothing to open. The 24 things we just walked through all needed the same thing. People in the same place, on the same day, with nothing else to do. But starting in the 60s, this country repealed those laws one by one in favor of commerce. Here's the part almost nobody knows. 2 economists, one from the MIT and one from Notre Dame, studied what happened where the laws came down. Afterward, church attendance fell, and giving fell. Faith didn't fall. Attendance fell. Because now there was a shift. So we didn't lose 25 traditions. We lost the day they lived on. And without the day, they fell on their own, one after another. All 25. Nobody in our families voted on that. Nobody asked us. One Sunday, the store just opened, and somebody had to go to work. That hot comb over the burner, those clothes hanging on the door, those 3 generations at one table, that warm plate crossing the street in a child's hands. Every bit of it stood on one single thing. A day nobody could touch, and they took it without telling us. Your family knew these 25 things. Maybe not all of them, but somebody in your blood heated that comb, carried that plate down the sidewalk, or sat 3 hours on that pew without moving. That didn't die. It just went quiet. They didn't take Sunday through the front door. They took it one shift at a time, one store at a time, until one day, we looked up, and it was gone. Now, some of you are thinking about one person, the one who got up before everybody, who kept the comb hot, the pot on, and the house standing. We made a whole video about her, about how she stretched one paycheck to feed 9 people. And there's one rule of hers no bank will ever explain to you. It's right here. Go ahead.